Good early afternoon, at least here on the Eastern time of the United States. You are tuning in to another Left Lens live stream. I hope you're all able to be notified by this. I know YouTube sometimes or a lot of times gives trouble to my subscribers. And also, I'm locked out of Twitter for a full week or more. And that's because of a thread that I shared here during the last live stream. I don't know if you all remember, but the last live stream that I did here, I talked about Tiananmen Square. I talked about the myths of Tiananmen Square that are spread by Western media. And I was then either reported or Twitter flagged. Sorry, Twitter flagged the thread as violence and harassment. I'm going to talk a lot more about this in the second half of the stream, but we're going to have a very special guest today. It's Camila Escalante of Cashapp News. She's going to be talking about the Summit of the Americas, political developments in Latin America more broadly, and it should be a really fun conversation. But while we're waiting for her, please do like the stream. Make sure you're subscribing to this channel. Make sure you're hitting that notifications bell. I think I'm going to do a poll for my subscribers here on YouTube to see if they're actually getting the notifications, because I've been hearing from many subscribers that they just don't get them. But in any event, it's been a hard week for me in terms of the censorship. Not being able to share, communicate, or do anything on Twitter for a week is actually very, very, very detrimental to just being able to communicate with my following, to be able to get my journalism and my work out there. So when I woke up on Sunday morning and found that out, I had just retweeted that thread on Tiananmen Square that evening, and then I woke up saying that my account was locked. I had to they wouldn't start the countdown unless I deleted the tweet. I submitted an appeal, but it just was not going quick enough. I don't know if you all have ever submitted appeals to Twitter. I have many times for being rejected for the so-called blue check for the verification, and I never get an answer in a timely manner. I always forget that I did it, and it ends up that, a week, 2 weeks, sometimes more go by, and then I get an answer. So there was no way I was going to wait for an appeal, but I just wanted to see if during the day something would happen, and of course nothing happened. So my countdown started yet last night. They're saying that I'm back in about 6 days and change. I was also told that it could be more. That's only a countdown of the minimum punishment that I will get. And so now I'm contemplating things like making another account. I am now publishing more on Telegram. So I'm actually going to put that link in the chat, and I'm going to put it in the chat later as well. This is going to be something, Telegram, that I'm going to be publishing a lot more to, because I don't think I can rely on Twitter anymore. Actually, I knew I couldn't rely on it. And now that I've gotten this kind of second strike, it seems like with each reporting of me that's successful, the punishment gets harsher. I suspect that my time there, especially when there's a sensitive issue that relates to China or US foreign policy in general, I'll be banned from Twitter. So this was kind of a wake-up call, and I'm going to be on Telegram more, and then I'm also going to be pursuing, I think, some of these alternatives. I am on Odyssey, so YouTube isn't the only place where these videos go, but of course I think I need to get on to some of these other platforms just to make sure that the content is safe and that it's not just going to be wiped away. But with that said, welcome, welcome, welcome. Please do like the stream, share it, subscribe to the channel, hit that notifications bell. If you're not getting the notifications, let me know. I'm going to be putting out a poll, I think, to the in the community posts. So please do look out for that in the coming days. And yeah, what more can I say? It was a very frustrating day yesterday. Thank you. First, I just want to say publicly thank you to all of those who help get the word out. It's hard to communicate with your followers when you literally have no access to them. So on Twitter, I had some very generous help from Ben Norton and Richard Medhurst, Caitlin Johnstone, Lee Camp. These are people that I did and I didn't. Some of them I reached out to, some of them I didn't, and it was really good to see that. So, when this happens to us, we should all be able to rely on each other to get that word out and to make it an issue, and to remind everyone that this is a huge problem and it's only getting worse. And in the second half of this program, after my conversation with Camila Escalante, we will talk more about what exactly Twitter said, what exactly got me to be locked out of the account, and what is the context for all of this. Because the thread was mainly benign. In my opinion, the most of what my thread was about was how actually there were a lot of mainstream Western media sources, CBS, Reuters, WikiLeaks, which isn't mainstream, but it did leak a diplomatic cable from a Chilean diplomat. I would consider that pretty mainstream. And that cable came from the U.S. embassy in China, so I would also consider that pretty mainstream. BBC, New York Times, even they all have over the course of the years talked about how there was no massacre. The Columbia Journalism Review, we can go on and on. Japan Times, there's source after source after source that shows there was no massacre on Tiananmen Square. And during those protests, there was violence, though, in and around that day in China. But the violence and the source of it is very dubious, given, and we should be very suspicious when we hear things like half the casualties being PLA, People's Liberation Army, Chinese soldiers, and police, right? That sounds to me more like a color revolution. Sounds to me not at all related to any kind of legitimate protest, right? That sounds like almost an open armed conflict with the government. And we know that the National Endowment for Democracy has bragged about their support of pro-democracy forces in China. We know the National Endowment for Democracy has done this in countries all over the world: Nicaragua, Venezuela, Ukraine. We can go on and on and on about how the NED has funded proxy wars. We know their involvement in Syria. We know their involvement in Hong Kong, which is related to, and I'll talk about this later, is related to the situation in Tiananmen Square, that Tiananmen Square incident. Actually, it was not just until a few years ago that Hong Kong, these opposition forces funded by the NED, would have vigils, right? Vigils over a massacre that didn't happen, right? So they would spread this propaganda. Now it's no longer allowed in Hong Kong. The new political administration, as well as just the ways in which the national security law has changed things, that's not allowed. But it happened for quite some time, right? So there is a deep bond between the forces of color revolution happening in the region, the targeting of China, and of course, it is related to the broad spectrum of color revolutions, proxy wars, subversion. Counterinsurgency is really the word that we should be using when it comes to how these incidents like Tiananmen Square and like others, right, Maidan, how those tend to happen. So, greetings everyone. While you're coming in, like the stream, be sure to subscribe to the channel, hit that notifications bell. Of course, the best way to support me to sustain my journalism is patreon.com/DannyHaiphong. Took a pretty big hit last month. Please do be sure, if you're able to subscribe, that you are doing so. That really helps support my work. There are other options in the description as well. And now that I am no longer on Twitter, at least for a week, but I think from here on out, I'll be posting on alternative sources. Be sure to subscribe to my Telegram. I put that in the chat already. I will put it in the chat again. Be sure to be subscribing to my Telegram. You can get pretty quick notifications there. I was resistant at first because I had been so conditioned to using Twitter, but I'm realizing that Telegram is actually very easy to use. It actually takes a lot less time than a tweet, and I think it's a much more user-friendly. Twitter has been extremely unfriendly in terms of how we get content out, and the algorithm absolutely destroys our capacity to promote our work. I've always found that to be so frustrating. I share a video like this, I say I'm going live, and I reach about a percent of my followers, less than 1%. But if I do some kind of hot take, right, that will grab eyeballs for the algorithm, then I reach a lot more. And I find that to just be such an indication about how Twitter is like the highest form of monopoly capital in the social media realm, in the communications and media realm, where everything about Twitter and Facebook, of course, long gone, it was, completely corrupted long ago. All of these social media outlets, they are only in it, right? Their only utility right now is their own profits. And more and more so, we're seeing that with how they are choosing to allow certain people, right, to spread information, misinformation, while those who are trying to spread the truth, we are censored, right? And I'm actually going to show you a very interesting later on. I'm going to find it. I just remembered this, but Caitlin Johnstone had an incredible thread about the suppression. She was very generous and mentioned my situation. And then she shared a very long thread about just censorship in general. And I want to show you at the end of, in the second half of this stream, I want to show you, she shared something that Jack Posabiec had shared last year, I believe it was. I can't find it right now. But essentially, he was calling for this guy was calling for, he's a huge right wing pundit figure. He was calling for the censorship of anyone who denied, believe it or not, who denied the Tiananmen Square situation. So that is how deep that goes. I don't actually know if I'll be able to find it. She's quite active on Twitter, and it doesn't look like um, it's showing up. But he was allowed to stay on, right? So he's literally calling for people to be censored. He's literally calling for people to be wiped off of Twitter. I actually had Prop or Not forces tag me, and I don't even think I'll be able to find that. Tag me in their celebrations that I've been taken off for a week. I mean, this is how insidious this is. And if you don't remember Prop or Not, they're the very shady group in 2017 that the Washington Post, Jeff Bezos' Washington Post covered. And they were kind of like the first Russiagate blacklist that came out. And it had all sorts of lefty news media, independent media, basically targeted as Russian disinformation. And that triggered all of these changes in the algorithms that these tech corporations have made to suppress our work. So they're celebrating, right? And now, we will talk about this all later. We will get back to this. But now I am pleased to be joined by Camila Escalante. She is a journalist for Cashapp News. She's been on this show before, and I wanted to have her on because, well, there's a big summit happening this week held by the United States, which has been subject to some controversy. So I'm going to bring her on right now. Hello, hi, Camila. How are you?
Hey, Danny, I'm good. How are you?
Good, good, good. Thanks for coming by. I know you're very busy. Yeah, I wanted to have you on because there's been a lot of conversation leading into the Summit of the Americas, and now it's happening or going to happen. I can't find a schedule anywhere. But it's supposedly today's the first day, and the latest news that I've heard is that AMLO, Mexican president Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador, he's not going. He's boycotted. Venezuela, Nicaragua, and Cuba have been shut out. predictably, but there was a lot of conversation leading into it about, well, would Biden allow at least a Cuban official of some kind there if it's not the president? So, what are your reactions to the Summit of the Americas? What can you tell us about it? What's the significance of it? And yeah, what are some of the things that you've been covering / paying attention to in regards to this occasion?
Well, right as I was about to join you, the Cuban Foreign Ministry has just released a statement, only in Spanish. Of course, we can always translate that on Cashapp News. That's something we would do, but typically the Cuban Foreign Ministry will get it out shortly in English. But it's basically just, a complete rejection, a denunciation, denouncement of this confirmed exclusion of Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela from the Summit of the Americas. But, they've been working on this guest list. Supposedly, the State Department and the White House has been working on the guest list for the Summit of the Americas for many months and in recent weeks. And this has included, negotiations, begging, desperate appeals to governments for them to come be a part of this summit in Los Angeles, which is taking place this week, beginning tomorrow. And a lot of governments, as you know, governments of CARICOM, governments of ALBA TCP, and around the region have said that they don't want to participate. Heads of state and government specifically have said that they themselves don't want to be there attending in person if these three governments, Nicaragua, Cuba, and Venezuela, are excluded. And it was only last night that the White House confirmed to some outlets and their White House correspondents that in fact those countries would be excluded. This is information that reporters of the White House, White House correspondents and State House accredited reporters have been begging for a really long time. Week after week, just about at least, let's say, half of all press conferences that were held by Ned Price at the State Department and by the former and now current White House spokesperson for Biden, they've been demanding this information. Who's invited? Are these people going to be excluded? Are they going to be inviting Juan Guaido? What are you going to do if these governments and these presidents, such as AMLO, are not going to attend? Isn't this important? And so this morning we found out that a major blow was dealt to Biden and the US administration, because in his morning press conference, President Lopez Obrador confirmed that he will not be confirming, given the news that those exclusions of those three countries is imminent. And he unfortunately will be sending his foreign minister, Ebrard, to participate. But I think a lot of the governments who unfortunately will be attending in some form, whether it is sending their foreign minister or an ambassador or someone else, they have said that they're going in order to make sure that these voices are heard, the voices of Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua. They're going in order to denounce their absence, the absence of the different governments of our America. And so they're ensuring that the different voices will be heard. President Nicolas Maduro of Venezuela has said that as well, that his voice and the voice of Venezuela will be heard at the summit in one way or another. And also, he has voiced support for the different counter summits and the different actions that are taking place around Los Angeles and also in Tijuana this coming week. We at Cashapp News are actually we're covering about 3 of these mobilizations that are being held against the failed Biden summit. We have a correspondent there, Abraham Marquez, and so just to list them off really quickly, we have the People's Summit for Democracy, which is possibly going to be the largest one. And there's going to be a lot of panels and some really great leftist and anti-imperialist voices will be taking part in some of the panels there. And then there's also the anti-imperialist summit of Nuestra America that is largely organized by Unión del Barrio and with the participation of Black Alliance for Peace and a lot of other largely LA-based organizations. And there's also the Workers' Summit that's taking place in Tijuana, which will have some participation from organizations like Alliance for Global Justice. We'll be covering all of those. So it's going to be a very busy week. And I just think it's very important to hear the voices of people who are not only part of the Latin American and Caribbean diaspora in the US, but also, we might hear some participation from people from leftist and revolutionary parties from around Latin America who will actually be able to participate in that. And they'll be denouncing the absence of some very critical voices and the most important governments of our region from Biden's failed summit.
Yeah, no, that sounds like a really busy week for you, but incredibly important. And I'm really happy to hear that there is so much counter resistance, so much resistance to this Biden summit. I find it really interesting that you have both this resistance that's building from various organizations and movements across the left. And you also have, as you said, Biden's failed summit. And the words Biden and fail seem to go together quite frequently of late. Why do you think, I mean, at this moment, it seems like one, in Latin America, there is a sort of I would say, a growth or consolidation of the left, so to speak. There has been recent victories, and it seems like there is more of a bold stance right now to Biden than there may have been in the past. What do you think is drawing this kind of resistance? And do you see, and as you mentioned, there are some contradictions here. You mentioned Mexico, the president, AMLO not going, but sending his foreign minister. I think we also had Argentina, right? Alberto Fernandez, he's going, but he's unhappy with what's going on. How do you see these contradictions, a boycott versus no boycott? And what do you think? I mean, what do you think about this? Like, why is this such a failure now? Like, why? What is the context for this what seems to be like just a diplomatic nightmare for Biden in a very critical time?
Yeah, it is a nightmare and it's an outright failure. And it needs to be said, and everybody feels the same. This is across the board. Everyone knows that. Of course, there are some countries that will always be by the side of the US. That is, of course, outgoing Ivan Duque of Colombia. We have a number of puppet governments in Latin America, also in the Caribbean, in the case of Jamaica and Haiti. But this announcement this morning, this confirmation by President AMLO is very important because what we've heard from the State Department just recently last week in a telephone press conference was that, one of the most important things that's going to be taking place at Biden's, Biden Almagro's Summit of the Americas is the signing of an agreement on migration. The issue of migration is something that the Biden administration has used to try to reach out to different countries, including Haiti, including Mexico. And of course, it's an issue that involves Guatemala, Honduras, El Salvador, very much, the northern triangle of Central America. And what we know even beyond Mexico's absence, of course, what they wanted was for President Lopez Obrador to be there for the in-person signing so that at least, these big major heads would be there together. And they would have that photo op, and it would be of great significance and, very central to what was to be accomplished in this summit. But not only will AMLO not be there, though his presentation will be, we heard, in previous weeks that even the right-wing president of Guatemala was saying that he was not going to be there because of some of what they consider to be interventionist moves by the United States, commenting on the way in which they run their own country. So, they denounced, some of the statements that were made by the United States. And of course, Nayib Bukele, who's also a neoliberal hack, who's also, in no way any sort of anti-imperialist. He's no sort of revolutionary, certainly not a socialist. He has also, for a while now, denounced what he considers to be meddling by the United States and interventionist statements. And he has also, refrained from supporting certain resolutions in the UN, for example, and has opted for what they consider to be a more neutral stance. And so there's a chance that Nayib Bukele wouldn't be attending. And of course, Xiomara Castro, who took office in Honduras as president in January, has also said that she would not be a part in person of the Summit of the Americas if those three heads of state were excluded. Those are the most important countries, apart from Haiti and some of those nearby Caribbean nations, with regards to the issue of migration. So that's a failure. Another failure, of course, is that we have so many countries that have either stood by Cuba and Venezuela, to a lesser extent Nicaragua, throughout these recent years, and they are, denouncing that they're not there. But we have also, a lot of countries are beginning to rebuild or bolster those relations with Venezuela. Now that Venezuela is bouncing back economically, and they're in a period of, very undeniable recovery, and it's unbelievable. And so a lot of countries are wanting to do, more and more with Venezuela. And so they're absolutely detesting this. And so it's a very strange time. So as far as, how the tide is turning in the United States among those organizations who'll be participating in some of these counteractions, to me, it's been unbelievable. We have a lot of content that we haven't had time to get out. There's a lot going on here in Bolivia as well. But, we've had a lot of, we've done some great interviews and gotten some great sound bites, and there's been some very good panels of people based in the US. Some of them are Chicano, others are Black American, and others are part of other, diaspora communities. And, their level of consciousness, anti-imperialist fervor, of knowledge is just, it's unbelievably high compared to, I think, what we would have seen a few years ago. People are really doing some great organizing and some great outreach with other organizations and popular movements in the countries that they're from, or other countries that they're in solidarity with. And so, I think this has the potential to grow into something much greater. That's what we heard from some of the organizations, such as Unión del Barrio, such as Black Alliance for Peace, and other Chicano organizations there in the US, that they want to use this to bring people together, and that Biden actually, his failure of this summit, of this, Biden OAS Almagro summit, is actually doing a great deal of work and a service to the anti-imperialist movement in the US. Because it's an opportunity to educate people and to speak about what the issues are. And, they're talking about issues that either won't be addressed at the summit, or they're going to be addressed in a very, silly way by supposed civil society actors, is what they're being called. That's what's going on today in terms of what you had mentioned, that you said it's very difficult to find the kind of schedule of the OAS summit. And that's, of course, because it hasn't been really released. They've been making it up as they go. They've been trying to figure out who they could get, because they've been begging for attendance. So what they're doing is they're bringing in civil society actors. They're bringing in youth, and they're bringing in the private sector. And they're doing this because they can't get anyone important or relevant to come here, except for, of course, those same puppets that we know. And so today they're going to have a day of workshops. Officially, the Summit of the Americas begins tomorrow, but today they'll be having a civil society set of panels, and it's a bunch of youth, or supposedly young people, people who really only exist on Twitter. You can't even Google them to find out who they are and what they really do. And they're probably people who were groomed in areas or arenas such as the Oslo Freedom Forum, or are basically on the State Department payroll. That, to me, is not civil society, but they'll be speaking about issues such as indigenous rights and the environment and all these things, but obviously in a very superficial way that's only for the cameras. In contrast, at these different anti-imperialist summits and people summits that are going to be going on in these panels, they're going to be speaking about the issues that impact working class people, both in the US and in Latin America and the Caribbean and throughout the global South.
Yeah. Well, when you mention the civil society, I can only think of just like proxy forces that are all geared toward targeting the very governments that are excluded from this Summit of the Americas, and also
that's exactly
others.
what it is. Because one of the things that they've said in these, a lot of the way we get some of the information about, what's really going to happen at this Summit of the Americas, what the conversations are, is actually from going to these right-wing US outlets, Voice of America, Miami Herald, CNN, outlets like these. And what's really interesting is what they're reporting is actually kind of accurate right now, because there's no denying that the US policy in Venezuela and the blockade and the sanctions and the regime change attempt to install Guaido and everything else has failed. And they're actually asking those questions. They're bringing those questions to the forefront, and they're demanding answers. And so, what the answers have been, repeatedly by the different State Department officials, is that there's going to be representation by these different, all these countries, that all these countries will be represented in some form, including the ones who said that they're not going to be attending, or the ones who are excluded by civil society actors. And, I was reading even in this morning in Bolivian media, Página 7, it's a right-wing outlet, and they released they released an interview that they conducted with a State Department official who came here to Bolivia in recent days, perhaps last week. And he, is not an official. I don't think that anyone would know. And he said that they did attempt to get a hold of President Luis Arce of Bolivia and government officials, and they weren't able to. So they basically just came here in order to hold a meeting and, conduct business with their own embassy. It's really sad. And Luis Arce himself has, said that he's not going to be attending the meeting. He will actually be sending representatives. Unfortunately, one of them may include the president of the Senate, Andrónico Rodriguez, who's also the vice president of the Six Federations, which is the campesino union that's associated with our outlet. But he said that the State Department official said that, he said that while Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela won't be there, we will have, citizens, private sector, youth, and civil society, as well as, in the case of Bolivia. I mean, these are just random people, but they're not so random, because some of these are people who've actually, had a long history of, again, being on the State Department payroll itself. So they will be expressing, the sorts of lines that we hear all the time, talking about authoritarianism, saying that it's political persecution against Janine Áñez, for example, or against, the State Department paid CIA actors in Cuba. Those are the sorts of issues they're going to be raising. Those are not the issues that people are concerned with here in Latin America at all. People are concerned about imperialism. They're concerned about, protection and defense of their resources and national sovereignty. And they believe that the pathway to economic prosperity and success is to be able to control our resources, get a hold of our, of our currency, be able to produce, expand production, trade, have amicable relations with our neighbors and with, whoever we want to overseas, and develop jointly with China, with Russia, and with Iran. These are the types of things we want implemented. And of course, they will not be speaking about that in any of Almagro's forums.
No. I mean, that you said it correctly. I mean, the gap between the direction that Latin America has been heading in and U.S. interests couldn't be higher. It couldn't be further and further apart. There couldn't be more difference. And it seems like, I was just thinking as you were talking, especially about how, before you were saying that this is like a failure, right? That Biden, this summit is a failure. It seems like and you mentioned Guatemala and Guatemala's displeasure. It reminded me of when Kamala Harris visited Guatemala, and what she said couldn't have been more insulting diplomatically, where she basically was talking about what largely, I mean, it's a foreign policy issue because the United States is at the root of the migration that occurs from Guatemala upwards to the United States. But she was framing it as almost like a domestic issue, but speaking directly to the people of Guatemala and to the Guatemalan government, saying, do not come to the United States. And then you had I believe it was 6 months later, 5 or 6 months later, the Biden administration, Joe Biden, said that Latin America is the US's front yard. It's more important than just the backyard. It's the front yard. Oh, speaking in this like new modernized kind of Monroe Doctrine language, all of this is seen. And then now you have 6 months later, after that, yeah, you have this Summit of the Americas, which is almost like a political expression of this treatment that the Biden administration has been leveling on Latin America. And you mentioned a few things there that I'd like you to speak about, right? You said the word unfortunately a few times. Could you speak to, because I think it's hard for even people on the left, but even just especially the general population in the United States, was to understand Latin America, the politics, the move, what's happening there, this left kind of upsurge and insurgency that's been going on for quite a while, but it's sort of had, I think, a recovery period after many setbacks, many of them U.S. backed in so many countries. Could you speak about sort of the complexity of it all? Because it seems like the left governments are navigating a whole lot, especially around how the United States is interfering in their political processes. Could you speak to that? Could you speak to the overall complexities of the situation? I've heard you speak in other places about it, so I'd love for our viewers to get your analysis of why it is that there has to be kind of like this hedging. Some leftists want to be like, no, just go for the gusto, just like, do what you do, pure, if you're not ideologically pure or politically pure, then you're, kind of negated. But it's more complex than that. It's more complicated. Could you speak to that about Latin America's left movements?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, there's a whole spectrum that we could talk about. So, of course, in response to the exclusion of these countries, we've heard some governments, uplift and try to promote as an alternative ALBA TCP, CARICOM, and CELAC. CELAC is the Community of Caribbean and Latin American States. We have people such as Alberto Fernandez, the president of Argentina. He's also the pro tempore president of CELAC. And of course, as you said, he will be attending in person the Summit of the Americas, but he's also denounced on repeated occasions not only the exclusion of these countries, but also the blockade on Cuba and Venezuela. And he's, of course, resumed those diplomatic relations that are so important with Venezuela. And so some of the other countries and governments that are represented in the region who have been very vocal against the Biden administration for this decision are the Caribbean states. And I think it's very important and represented very well within ALBA TCP that a lot of these countries are not explicitly socialist. Some of them don't necessarily characterize themselves as being anti-imperialist. And in the case of, for example, Gaston Brown, who's the Prime Minister of Antigua and Barbuda, he's someone who has denounced the decisions by the U.S., has called them exclusionary, but he has said that he himself is, someone who has interest in personal interests in the private sector. He's a businessman, and that he doesn't necessarily see eye to eye with countries like Venezuela, but he has repeatedly defended Venezuela's right to self-determination and, protection and defense of its own sovereignty. This is another sort of category of countries that we see in Latin America. But apart from that, just in general, we're seeing a number of countries, and this is not widely reported in the English-speaking media, although these are English-speaking Caribbean states. But a lot of these states have been really, strengthening their bilateral relations with Russia and China. And they've been doing the sort of trade and cooperation that they want to do, not only with, Cuba and Venezuela, which they've long had medical cooperation with, among which they have shared resources and vital supplies during environmental disasters, during the pandemic, and at other times. And so, not only that, but they're really looking overseas and they're strengthening those relationships. And of course, joining in on projects with aims at furthering development with countries like China. And this is something that the State Department and the US government in general is very weary of. They're very concerned about, because it means that you don't have to be the most revolutionary government on the continent. You don't have to be President Nicolas Maduro or the Communist Party of Cuba in order to begin to look away and look for other alternatives towards development and towards reaching some of the goals of their societies. But I would like to say that I think it's not just that these governments are rejecting the Sound of the Americas because of its exclusionary nature and because of it goes without saying, but a lot of countries were actually very angry following the coup in Bolivia. They're very resentful, and they have rejected, in many instances, the actions of Secretary General of the OAS, Luis Almagro, and of the OAS itself being used as a tool for intervention, specifically in electoral processes, but also in other cases, such as in Venezuela. It wasn't even just an election, it was just intervening in general. As was the case in Nicaragua and in Cuba, but they are also rejecting US hegemony in general. And they're saying that, they may have voted one way or the other in the United Nations General Assembly, and they may have made some statements in rejection of Russia's military operation when it began in the first few months, but they do not agree with the actions of the United States and Europe and their allies and NATO, and the way in which this conflict, which was generated by Europe and the global North, is having effects on our people here in the global South. It's making life more expensive. It's making it more difficult to get our hands on necessary supplies. It's making gas more expensive. And this is a rejection, their hesitance to further involve themselves in this summit, in the OAS, and anything else proposed by the US is a rejection of that US-European dominance. And it's also understood not only by the government, but by actual people of the Caribbean and Latin America as white supremacy, as supremacism. And people are starting to see the way in which this has nothing to do with us. This has nothing to do with us. And there are, implications that are not only, anti-poor, anti-working class, but severely racist. And, the kind of the kind of discourse we hear from Europe, from the European Union, is extraordinarily racist. And so people are seeing that as well. And I think that's going to carry on beyond this summit. We're going to see the continuation of these countries looking to the East to develop different relationships and not look to the US anymore. We don't need the US to stand between us and our neighbors and our potential collaborators, our potential friends around the world.
Woof, that was, that's just, there's nothing, you just put the hammer down. That's exactly how I see it. What you're saying is so important. It speaks to this growing multipolar world that I know you and others have been talking about here. We talk about it a lot in this channel. And when you talk about the complexities of even, maybe we characterize them as more capitalist-oriented governments, or even if we go so far and call them puppet states, but even these governments that have a vested interest in the international financial system, the U.S. dominated international financial system, even if they have been politically close to the United States, there is this, I think, growing factor of the U.S. and Europe are literally making it so their interests, the interests of their clients, are infringed upon. And so what are governments, the same as has happened on the African continent, all across the African continent, it's when your policy, your general policy, especially economic policies, when you're waging economic warfare at this level, now you mentioned the Russia military operation and the US and Europe's response, that level of economic warfare has had such, I think, a cascading effect on the world, the entire world, but especially global South countries that rely on energy, that rely on Russia's energy and just aid, and that also rely on a relatively stable world economy where prices aren't.
It's distracting me a little bit.
Hold on.
No, please cross.
Oh, sorry. I'll mute you while you're setting up. No worries. But yeah, it seems like there's this uh growing understanding regionally that the United oh, we lost Camila. Okay, well, hopefully she'll be back. So anyway, that's we'll wait for Camila to come back, but there she is. As I was there you are. No worries. I will
Sorry, I'm getting a lot of messages. I just want to say, because it's very important, Anya's, her legal team failed to stall the trial in the Golpe de Estado dos case, and it's supposed to restart this afternoon. And so a lot of people are kind of curious, because what it sounds like is she might actually receive a sentence today. For this is everything
Awesome.
that took place before the coup, when she swore herself in, not the crimes such as the massacres that took place
Oh,
after
wow.
she was into power. But continue. I'm sorry. I
No, no, that's really, I mean, not only is that really important information, but it's totally related, because I think one of the reasons too that US moves, even like soft power moves, like though that was held in Bolivia, which led to that massive coup. I think one of the reasons that US influence is not having the same effect anymore is it's this global phenomenon. The US policy and Europe's policy, which is now literally just US policy at this point in terms of this economic warfare and everything else, it is having such a negative impact on the global economy, the world economy, and on just the capacity to breathe. I mean, that's how it feels. It feels like most of the global south just can't breathe under this arrangement anymore. And it doesn't matter if I mean, it does matter, but the character of a certain society, let's say, as you were saying, Antigua, they're just because they have vested interest in the world financial system, close to the United States, maybe politically, doesn't mean that they're just gonna do what Europe has done, which is shoot itself in the foot because that has political consequences. A lot of even governments that are completely aligned with imperialism, because of so many reasons, neocolonialism, all of that, doesn't mean that they can deal with constant instability and expect to remain in power. And I think the multipolar world is bringing about a situation where countries don't need the United States, don't need Europe, they don't need to rely on them so much anymore. And it's causing a lot of friction. And I think it's weakening US policy everywhere. And I think that's why we're
Absolutely.
seeing this contradiction.
I mean, it just, any small, tiny bit of fake credibility that the European Union, these European NATO states, and the US and Canada would have had before is going straight out the door. I was just laughing in a chat with some friends about, this tweet that we saw that's saying anti-Russian sanctions are working in Germany. Supermarket chain Rue warns only that only one critical item is allowed per shopper. The items are pasta, flour, and other groceries. There's a name for it, food rationing. And so, it's really funny, because then some UK person comes on here and says, it's a clever master plan to reverse and stop inflation. It was used in the Great Depression by Eisenhower. It works better than interest rate hikes that completely fail. They're saying, this white woman from the UK is saying that, rationing these products, which are very normal products, is, being done deliberately, and that it was used in the Great Depression by Eisenhower. My question is, did she make the same comment when people had to stand in lines for basic necessities in 2018 in Venezuela? Has she made the same comment about Cuba when there were shortages of some essential products in past years? She's saying that it's like a smart idea that they're rationing pasta, flour, and other basic groceries. And you look at the picture of the grocery shelf, and it's literally, the most common grocery store items, such as the pasta brand Barilla. And we have that here. And guess what? Throughout this entire conflict, and prior and after, the price of Barilla, unless something happens at the source, is not going to change, because we haven't seen inflation here in Bolivia. And these things are just as available by quantity as they were before, by stock. Every store still has them. And it's at the same price as when I came here, 3 years ago.
Wow.
Nothing has changed. The price of bread hasn't changed. The price of chicken and meat is not supposed to change because there are government controls and because the government, through its various institutions, through its various ministries, is making sure that they supply the producers with the things they need, such as wheat, such as corn, maize, and other things in order to produce, the things that they produce that are most consumed here in this country. The prices are not supposed to go up. Not only that, but the forward thinking of Bolivia's economist president and the rest of its government is actually benefiting countries of the region. We're benefiting because I'm not Bolivian, of course I'm not the government or the producer, but they are producing fertilizer. They are going to supply fuel for countries like Argentina and Peru and even Brazil. And so, these are the sorts of things that happen when these governments speak to one another, when the producers and the small farmers, the campesinos, and the different, producers of quinoa, of coffee, and so forth, are there sitting at the table quite literally with the federal government, with the national government, and with the president, speaking about the fears they have, the concerns they have, the shortages that they foresee coming, and the fear they have that could impact their ability to produce. They're resolving those things here at the table here in La Paz, and they're making sure that there's no supply chain interruptions like we see in the United States and other parts of the world. And not only that, there are several ideas for what Mercosur and CELAC is and can be, but these are mechanisms for not only regional integration, but economic cooperation and and trade areas, and as well as the Andean community. And so we have the capacity in the future, beyond what we do now, to get the supplies we need from our neighbors. We always say that Latin America and the Caribbean and Africa, the global south, are resource rich areas. We have everything we need to be able to survive. And we just need to find the ways to get the supplies we need from our own countries and produce them here, or get them from our neighbors and be able to share at fair prices, for the producer, for the consumers. And we do not need to go overseas. The State Department right now has this campaign, and they're making graphics and videos, and they have talking points about the way in which Russia is denying 20 or 30% of the world, or whatever the hell, access to wheat, and anything else they produce, as if it's owed to the United States government, as if it's owed to the imperialists of the EU. It's absolutely not, first of all. And second of all, how funny and ironic that countries like Bolivia, that has historically been so deprived of its right to development and economic resources, and has been literally raped and robbed and everything else, and then it's still struggling with development right now, has all of the resources that these other countries are crying about, and is able to share with its neighbors. Venezuela is sharing with its neighbors amid hurricane season, the start of hurricane season, and other environmental disasters. We're able to find ways to help one another through ALBA TCP, but also just through regular bilateral relations and cooperation. This is something that the EU and US and Canada do not understand, but it's being implemented here. So the more we can find ways to produce here, to share here, to find more efficient ways involving new technology transfer with countries like Iran and Russia and China, the better off we'll be. And Europe will look like a fucking dick. Like, they're just going to look absolutely stupid. They can sit there and keep talking about how Russia is denying them the right to Barilla pasta, but we still have pasta, and we don't need Barilla either, because we're going to have our own factories here with our own high quality pasta.
Barilla, oh man, Barilla is such trash too. So yes, like that's definitely a clarion call to continue that sovereign development. I mean, what you described, I mean, it's just the beauty of socialism. I mean, food is a commanding height of the economy, right? It's based in the land. It's a central need of a society, and when you mentioned something like technology transfer, it made me think of China because, as you said, China and Latin America are getting closer and closer. And a lot of the things that they're complaining about Latin America, they complain about China. Like China, yeah, China did demand technology transfer. Because what are you going to allow a foreign entity, foreign corporation to invest in your country and not get anything out of it? Are you going to let them just exploit your country? No, a sovereign development is not based on allowing foreign investment to just take everything and you get nothing. No, technology transfer is a very low end demand, that's part of a fair business relationship where it's like, yeah, you can have X market access, you can have XYZ what you need here. And what we're going to get back, if you have a strong government that has this kind of socialist orientation, we're going to learn from what you're doing. And then we're going to do it later on in order to build up and develop the country and have a diverse economy, one that can meet the needs of people. And I think what you describe, what Bolivia is doing, what you describe Venezuela, you mentioned the low inflation there. I mean, it's incredible that a country that was having inflation at 10,000%, not more than 2 years, like 10,000%, 99% of revenue stripped from the country because of sanctions. And yet now the country, because of a socialist governance system, is able to adjust to that, is able to do what's best for both the country and the region, to be able to lower inflation in that way. I think it's like it's like 1% right now amid this intense conflict where everything is going up. And as you described, Europe Europe is being hit incredibly hard, and it seems like these imperialists, they cannot help but just try to explain it away, that, oh yeah, food rationing, that's just a policy that we did back in the day to help stabilize things. It's like, no, the capitalists are just literally stealing and robbing from us right now. There is, as you demonstrate in Latin America, with examples like Bolivia, there's no reason why this needs to happen. Like this does not need to be happening right now. And all of the various justifications are just putting wool over our eyes so we don't see that it is this imperialist, this capitalist system that's just stealing everything. And they're trying to steal everything from Latin America. And that's why there's such conflict there. Anyway, I'll stop. That's why there's such a conflict with what's going on there and why the United States is so hostile.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think going back to the reasons why some Caribbean heads of states and government decided to refrain from attending the Summit of the Americas and are hesitant to get involved, further with the OAS, which they are, they continue to be members of the Organization of American States. The only countries that have really, pulled out or in the process of course, Cuba, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. But, some of the other, reservations they have is, the Caribbean and CARICOM have had, I would say 3 major issues that they always talk about that are very important for the global South. And, we don't hear enough about them from the right-wing puppet governments of Latin America, non-Caribbean Latin America. One of those things, it goes without saying, is climate change. They speak about it in every single intervention, in every forum, internationally and in their own, national press conferences and everything else. The way in which disproportionately climate change is having effects on the Caribbean region, especially on small countries that don't have a lot of resources, small economies, and the way in which we are impacted here, but the effects of climate change and everything, it does have a source. We do have people who can countries that contribute more to environmental degradation, and that's of course the global north and how they need to be held to account. And that includes them taking further steps in countries like the United States to not only, change their own policies and the policies that govern the multinationals there, but also, contribute to the recovery efforts in the global South. They've also talked about, how difficult it is for small economies with the debt burden that they have. And they've also spoken very importantly, about maintaining Latin America and the Caribbean as a zone of peace, as outlined by CELAC. And so, this is one of the things that people are very concerned about. And the concern really intensified since 2018 with this hybrid war on Venezuela. And, this included all of these different threats from the Trump administration about a military option on the table against against Venezuela, but of course with the aims of getting rid of President Nicolas Maduro and his government. They made all sorts of threats, all sorts of comments, and of course we know, the whole story. They've planned all sorts of coup attempts, assassination attempts, from Colombian territory with the use of US and Colombian mercenaries and everything else. But the leaders of the Caribbean began realizing that they're increasing patrols under the guise of, stopping narco activity in the Caribbean Sea, in the Atlantic. And, what they're really just doing is further militarizing our region for no fucking reason. Why? What is happening in our region that they have to send more warships, that they have to position themselves in all these different countries, increase the presence at their existing bases, carry out all these drills, these South Command drills that are being carried out jointly with other countries, as well as some of the military exercises, including European countries and their colonies and territories here in the Americas, are just an extension of NATO. And I think that people are really starting to see these governments, for example, Barbados, Mia Mottley, Prime Minister there, and obviously the more outspoken ones, which have been the Prime Minister of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Ralph Gonsalves, the Prime Minister of Dominica, Roosevelt Scarrett, both of which were very good friends with Hugo Chavez. These people have been alerting the rest of CARICOM and our region for a long time that we don't need that sort of militarization in our region. There's no reason to have that sort of hostility. Venezuela doesn't have its own hostility with Caribbean states. It might have a border dispute, territorial dispute with Guyana, and things like that, but that is very specific. That needs to be held, in an international court or, in dialogue between the two countries. But there's no reason to have a country, which is the United States, that considers us to be their backyard, coming down here and positioning military all over. That's another reason why, they are on alert. They're discussing this, and it's something that they agree with, the rest of the region. Why are we having these drills? And so the Caribbean states are not non-NATO major allies. They haven't been deemed that. Argentina has, Colombia has, Brazil has a relationship, with the United States. But these other countries have nothing to do with it, and they have no part in it. So I think that this is another thing that, we'll see them continue to raise in international forums, and hopefully this week as well, for those that are participating in Biden's failed summit.
Yeah, no, the militarization, I mean, this has been going on for so long in Latin America, and now that the political situation has changed so dramatically in the Caribbean too, it would be incredible should that issue be raised, because I think that it would only strengthen the global forces that are building against the military component of imperialism. It's not talked about so much with Latin America either anymore, as much as it maybe was during maybe the Contra Wars, etc. There's still, I mean, the U.S. military presence is very heavy in Latin America, as you said, in the Caribbean. I mean, look at just what's happened to Haiti in the last, several decades. It's just been an absolute nightmare. And so, as as the United States continues to fail, I think this reliance on the military becomes more and more important. We talk about that a lot here. That's why the Asia Pacific against China is so militarized. That's why Eastern Europe, the Baltics, all of that is so militarized now via NATO, via all these other military formations that the U.S. seems to be thinking of every half year or so. And of course, in Latin America, very similarly. And I think all of it has to do with hegemony. And it seems like the appetite for U.S. hegemony is waning. It's becoming less and less desirable, and it's kind of having this effect, I think, of unifying. And I think I always say it's unfair to say that the militarization, that endless war, is the principal reason to unify anywhere, right? Anywhere in the global South, which has such common interests across the board that are very positive. But it only serves, I think, to accelerate that process because, well, guns, proxy wars, these kind of things, bombings, military, all of these things do pretty heavy damage to societies and create so much instability.
Yeah, absolutely. And on both levels, both the level of the government and of social movements, we're seeing, a lot of rejection of U.S. security doctrine and a rejection of the U.S. war on drugs and, everything else having to do with their, supposed strategies against, narco trafficking, against everything else here on our continent. It has all been either deliberately failed or, it was designed to be that way, or whatever the case. We're seeing a huge rejection of it. If you watch, if you follow Evo Morales's social media, he has spoken out a lot against NATO expansionism, both around the world and also specifically here in our region, and as has President Nicolas Maduro and his Bolivarian government. And so on the government level, we have a lot of people who've spoken out against it, and they have even proposed, and maybe are planning, a number of conferences against NATO. And then on the social movement level, in, for example, Panama, there is a huge rejection every time some sort of Washington official comes to visit the government there. People remember the terrorist actions that took place, the bombings that took place just as recently as the 90s, and other and several other instances of intervention and violence against the Panamanian people, in which Panamanian citizens died, who were not any sort of military or combatants or anything. And so, we are seeing a lot of, this issue is arising. In the case of Brazil, we are going towards an election that's going to take place at the beginning of October, in which hopefully former President Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva will be elected after his political imprisonment and the lawfare that was waged against him. Obviously, the polls favor him, but one of the issues that they'll have to take on if Lula and the Workers' Party is elected there during the October elections is the issue of the militarization of cities and of the country in general, and the violence against, against the poor that greatly affect the favelas and the poor areas of Rio de Janeiro, Sao Paulo, and all the other cities of the country. This is part of the U.S. sort of security doctrine that has been exported to countries of Latin America, that we see imposed in El Salvador by Nayib Bukele, where they are not only arresting people en masse, everybody is, considered guilty without any sort of a trial, treating everyone as their violent criminal gang member offenders. And in the case of Brazil, just killing people on the spot in what accounts as massacres, slaughters in the poorest neighborhoods of particularly Rio. And of course, the people who are being killed are young teenagers, even children, women that have nothing to do with anything, just people on their way to different errands and school and everything else. And it's not something that's spoken about, but I think, outside of Brazil, because it happens so often. But I think it needs to be understood as part of this failed, strategy against crime, against gangs, against, multi or transnational criminal organizations, or whatever it is that they say it is. These have all been implemented by the United States with advising from the United States, a lot of times with in-person, people being sent from the United States to implement these policies nationally within these different countries. In the case of Ecuador, just as one final example, the war and conflict in Colombia that has taken place over decades, and the resurgence of paramilitarism and the high levels of crime and massacres and killings, which have resulted in the killings of social leaders, of environmental activists, of campesinos, and of signatories of the 2016 peace accord has spilled into Ecuador in the worst of ways. And Ecuador is seeing just unbelievably high rates of violent crime across the countries. In the beginning of Lenin Moreno's neoliberal puppet government in 2017, we began to see a little bit of crime seeping in from Colombia on Ecuador's northern border with Colombia. Now we're seeing prison massacres every month. We're seeing people being decapitated on the streets. We're seeing executions of people like TV presenters as a form of terrorism. We're seeing extortions, things that we didn't see under the 10 years of the citizens' revolution of Rafael Correa. And it needs to be understood that this is all the result of the close relationships of Colombia and Ecuador with Washington, and the policies that are being implemented with those countries, allowing military bases into their territories. In the case of Colombia, it's 7 military active bases right now, and a lot of DEA and other official presence of Washington in Colombia. And after expelling some of that U.S. presence under Rafael Correa in Ecuador, they have since allowed the U.S. to return. And this is what we're seeing right now.
Yeah, well, I mean, the struggle continues, and it seems like the securitization. The deep legacies of all of this, and how enveloped it is in the region. It's a struggle that's definitely ongoing. And I remember Glenn Ford telling me when one of the last times I was able to be with him in person, he would always talk about Brazil because he visited Brazil under the first Lula administration. He said, he was like, they have some things they need to deal with when it comes to the security forces, when it comes to you mentioned the terror, the kind of like the terrorization of poor people. He was like, a lot of those poor people are Black people, and it creates a lot of tension, and it's a political, it creates a lot of opportunities to politically undermine something like the Workers' Party at any point. It's something that needs to be addressed, but it's very complicated, as you said, though, because of these deep relationships that go back for so long. But you're right, they need to be addressed, and they're going to have to be addressed, because these situations, they don't get better just because other areas are being addressed. This is something that has to do with sovereignty, everything we were talking about, multipolarity, sovereignty. This is a huge component of it, to be able to have security forces, military forces not be so attached to the United States and to its a massive war machine, which will do anything. This is like the line, like it's the first and it's the last line of defense for the United States right now at the moment when it comes to its dominance in Latin America. You can react to that. I also want to ask you one last question. I want to ask you about the work you have upcoming, what you're covering. I know you're covering a lot of the anti-imperialist work happening. You did mention a few things that you haven't been able to get out there, but just a kind of like a plug for Cashapp News and that sort of thing to end as well, to end our conversation. But I'll let you react to also what I said and your plug.
Yeah, I think it's high time that countries around the region, not just not just like the sort of ALBA friends and friends of ALBA, but other countries start looking at the examples of the revolutionary Sandinista government of Nicaragua, the successes under the revolutionary Cuban government and Bolivia, and applying them at home. And with regards to what we're speaking about, one of the most important things would be the nationalization of the anti-drug strategy, and expelling U.S. military bases, expelling their anti-drug DEA forces there, and any other unnecessary presence of the U.S. The U.S. only needs to be in other countries with its embassy, and its embassy should not have any right to meddle in the affairs of that country. As per the Vienna Convention, it's very straightforward that they, have done far beyond what is legal under international law. But one of the things that we're doing, at Cashapp News that we think is very important, and we hope to do in some of the upcoming interviews and coverage that we'll be doing, is highlighting some of these successes with regards to the economy and production. And in the case of Venezuela, there's a lot of new activation of productive forces, because the reason why Venezuela was so affected by the unilateral coercive measures of the US and Europe in 2018, 2019, 2020, is because they didn't have a lot of the sort of self-sufficiency in terms of food sovereignty and the production levels that we have seen for a while in Nicaragua and now in Bolivia. And so, they were really affected, but going forward, if, sanctions are maintained or anything, they're going to be finding ways around that. And it's very important to look at the models that have been implemented in Nicaragua and Bolivia, and why they've been able to maintain such low inflation rates, and why, they can start thinking about that cooperation with other countries in terms of technology, in terms of culture, educational exchanges and stuff like that. But they know that they'll be producing their own food within the country, and the necessary basic supplies. For the rest of the week, like you said, we'll be covering these anti-imperialist and anti-OAS, anti-Biden actions that are taking place there in Los Angeles. And we'll be following anything that happens here with regards to the justice for the crimes of the coup, including, the Janine Áñez case, which has been multiple times stalled. But there's a lot of other things, interesting things that are happening here as well. So you'll see lots of that. And yeah, I think that's it.
Great. No, it sounds like a lot of work, a lot of good work. I put in the description of this video links to Cashapp News and to your Twitter. So be sure to support all of the work. Make sure that you're following. Make sure that you're subscribing. Thanks so much, Camila. I mean, this was great. I mean, the analysis was just on point. Thanks so much for spending a time with me this afternoon. And yeah, good luck with everything. We'll definitely have you on.
The other thing, soon. I mean, I think I already said this, but obviously the Brazilian election is something that's on the top of our list. Yeah. It also, as Glenn Ford made his own reflections on Brazil, I mean, I don't know, like, if people from the US who spent some time in Brazil, but it literally is, for me, it's the most important election, this year. It is a country that, changed my life and is just very important. It's like the center of the universe for me. It's a country we really don't report on a lot. Mm-hmm. And obviously some of the reason is because, there's kind of this divide between Spanish-speaking Latin America, English-speaking Latin America and Caribbean, and the, Brazilian, Portuguese Brazilian. But, that's something that we want to overcome, provide some more translation, some more context to what's going on there, both visually through videos, through some of our social movement collaborators, and some, we'll also be there in person. I'll be going to Brazil later this year, but it's a very important election. And, it's just like a huge population of our continent and world is in Brazil, and it's a major economy. And, as an article that was just published this morning, I'm not sure if it's this morning, but by Brazil Wire, apparently Washington was able to convince Bolsonaro to go to the US to participate in this summit. So now that will be the focal point, because everything else failed, and AMLO, who they were treating as the most important part of the summit, won't be there. So, this is very important with the new emphasis on the BRICS and alternative currencies, and everything else. Brazil will become more important. So we're going to have our eyes on that in terms of electoral processes this year.
Yeah, no, we'll definitely have to have you back on to talk about that leading into the election as things start to develop, as we start to know more about how things are going. And of course, I mean, we can't put it past the imperialists. There will be, I'm sure, a lot to talk about in terms of because it seems like Lula is doing quite well in terms of just how he is perceived and how he is going to do even just early on. So it's going to be very interesting, and it's super important, as you said. It's like in Latin America. It's really the focal point of everything we've been talking about on the global scale in terms of moving towards sovereign development, multipolarity, all of this, which leads more into more favorable conditions to the knock on wood, the eventual collapse of capitalism. I mean, it's critically important for Lula, for the Workers' Party to regain their rightful place in Brazil's government. So, with that said, though, thank you so much, Camila. I really appreciate it. I'll be sticking around for another half hour or so, but we will be back with you again soon. We'll definitely have you on as things develop. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for having me. We also have a Patreon I should have plugged, but
yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm really sorry to hear about your censorship. Obviously, that's the same reason why I left my old Twitter, is because that Twitter is censored and you never see anything on it, and it just became unusable.
Awful.
So,
It's awful.
solidarity with you, and we'll also look
Thank
for,
you.
other better platforms to use going forward, and,
Sure.
following you now on Telegram.
Yeah, thank you so much. And yeah, definitely go to the can people get to the Patreon on the website? Is it available
Yeah, you
there?
can find it on the website and on Kaosatsu News Twitter. It's linked
Okay.
at the top.
Okay. All right. Well, definitely check that out, guys. Thanks so much, Camila, and we will talk again very soon.
Thank you.
All right, everyone. So stick around for another half hour or so. I will be on. I want to talk to you about what's been going on with me, just to set the record straight a bit. There's been a lot of confusion. First of all, that was a great. I mean, it's always great with Camila. I mean, someone who's so dedicated, who does her to the craft and also the politics, and so close to it, and with the experience, and I think just the correct orientation. It's just great to have that kind of energy on this program. I really appreciate it. It was a great talk. Now to what I wanted to talk about with all you. Please do continue to like the stream, share it, subscribe to the channel, all that good stuff. Support me on Patreon. Support me in all the links in the description. There's so many options, but patreon.com/Dhaiphong is the best. I'm locked out on Twitter, as I said. I wasn't able to go live about this when it happened. I had way too many things to do. I generally don't go live on Sundays anyway. So I woke up the morning of Sunday, yesterday. What was that, June 5th? And I just retweeted the day before, on June 4th, a thread that I did on Tiananmen Square on the so-called massacre. And I thought, I'm just going to bed. The thread was kind of stalling, and I was very suspicious about that because it had started out quite well. A lot of people were sharing it. It was a trending topic, and suddenly it started to sputter. So at the end of the evening, I was like, let me just retweet it, see what's going on. Lo and behold, I probably got either mass reported by ASBI slash anti-China, anti-communist, all these bots slash unfortunate real people. Or Twitter flagged it. I don't know which one. They never tell you. So I woke up and I got a message that I was locked out for at least a week. I couldn't touch that mess. Once I hit the touch screen, it went to a completely different message saying that I needed to delete the tweet in order for the countdown to begin. But it didn't even say countdown to begin. It just said I needed to delete the tweet or appeal because I violated their rules of violence and harassment and inciting it and all this nonsense. I'll show you. I can pull up my Instagram. I'll share my screen because I did publish the thread, or at least a version of the thread, on Instagram. But for me, right, what's so important here is that I, first of all, don't know when I'm coming back. It's just like a complete and utter egregious example of censorship. It's just like with a snap of fingers, just, a blink of the eye, Twitter, these platforms, big tech platforms, monopolies, they can just decide what is legitimate information and what isn't. And as I said before, right-wing pundit, figure, celebrity, whatever he is, Jack Posobiec, he in 2021 said, "Oh well, everyone, the year before uh, of the last anniversary of Tiananmen Square incident, he said that Twitter should start censoring people." This is supposedly a free speech advocate saying that Twitter should start censoring people, whoever is questioning Tiananmen Square, whoever's questioning the narrative, doing the bidding of the Communist Party of China. These forces are allowed to stay. They're allowed to be there, right? The far right, the actual right wing, those who have influence, those who are very connected to the political establishment of the neoliberals, the neocons, all of them, they're allowed to stay, and they're allowed to call for the cancellation, for the erasure, for the censorship of anyone they don't like. And that's exactly what has happened over the course, especially the last 6 months or so, leading into Russia's special military operation. And of course, since then, the last 100+ days, where we've seen just a massive escalation of this. But you may remember that even before this, there were key changes and reforms happening with these big tech monopolies. One of which was with Twitter partnering with the Australian Strategic Policy Institute, a defense department, Australian Defense Department, a US Defense Department, a military contractor funded think tank, big tech funded think tank, which is literally an arm basically of the US government, partnering with Twitter to do exactly what just happened to me, which is censor anyone who challenges the pro-war, pro-establishment position on China. And of course, the Tiananmen Square incident, the so-called quote-unquote massacre that never happened, is one of the most sensitive issues. And so I was basically put on the chopping block because this is the policy. This is the attack. This is the assault that is happening. So now I am waiting for the next 6 days to see if Twitter will let me back in. That's why I am using Telegram now to publish my posts, to publish all of my content now, as well as, of course, Patreon and Substack, which you can find in the description of this video and other places. I'm on Instagram, but none of those have the same kind of following as I had on Twitter, because I was able to build relationships. I was able to do a lot of work, share a lot of work there, and build connections with the rest of the independent media to build more of a following and a platform. And Twitter, I suspect, will eventually just permanently suspend me, and then I'll have to make a new account and all of this nonsense, uh, which I'm already considering doing, to have a backup account, just because of this nonsense. So nonetheless, I wanted to just bring up and raise what I exactly said. Some of you may be familiar with the thread already. Some of you may have been watching me on the Tiananmen Square stream that I did on June 4th. But I do want to show you. So here's my Instagram, all right? So I do want to show you what happened first and foremost. So here is what I said, okay, on Instagram. This is the message that I got. Your account has been logged for violating Twitter rules against abuse and harassment. So that's basically what I did. By countering the mainstream Western imperialist narrative about Tiananmen Square, the Western narrative against China, I have been labeled someone who has violated abuse and harassment rules. So I may not engage in the target of harassment of someone, or incite other people to do so. I'll show you what I said. I don't think that's what I did, but of course, this is all arbitrary. And so, oh, sorry about that. So, I'm trying to get to the next photo. Okay, it's kind of, so it says, so this was the tweet. Every June 4th, Western propagandists remind us of the Tiananmen Square to smear China. The truth: no massacre occurred on the square, and the violence that took place in Beijing during that time was part of a failed color revolution backed by the United States. That's interesting. That didn't sound like inciting violence. That did not sound like I was I don't know, harassing anybody there. But yet that's what I was told. And then, of course, here's the message. This is what they say to you: delete the tweet, right? So they said, because I violated it, I wished harm, hoping that someone experiences physical harm against I don't know who, but that's what I did. Um, then I need to delete the tweet. Okay. And then this is what shows up when you go to my account. So I am not able to access the account. Okay. So there's a lot of people saying that, oh, I'm back, right? No, 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 no. I was never taken off. I was never erased. I just can't get into it. And I did delete the tweet, and now I can get into I can log into the account, but I can't do anything but speak to followers by DM, text only. So I'm in read only mode. So I don't have any capacity to use Twitter in actuality. So I wanted to show you all that just to inform you of the situation, just to show you where things are at, and just how egregious this censorship is, just how utterly bankrupt it is. And this is kind of what we're facing right now whenever we happen to talk about something that the imperialists don't like. And let me just tell you that I have heard from more than one person now, more than one person. And I won't say their names because this is not about who they are, but they're all friends, they're all comrades, they're all anti imperialists who have told me when I mention this, when I talk about this with them, they'll say, oh, yeah, I think twice about what I say, or I really am careful about how I word things, about what content I decide to put in my tweets. I put it, posts, whatever it is, because of the fear that the accounts will just be erased and will be gotten rid of. So that is the ultimate effect of censorship. It isn't just that um, this has an individual impact. No, this has a widespread chilling effect. It's to reduce the impact, the influence, and ultimately the activity of those who are engaged in real anti-imperialist work, real socialist work, real work for the people in the realm of information, which happens to be one of the most important sites of struggle at this moment because of how deep the propaganda is, and because of how influential propaganda is to imperialist propaganda is in preventing the movements from strengthening, right? It prevents movements from strengthening. It causes divisions. It creates confusion. And that's exactly what the political establishment of the capitalist, imperialist political establishment and their economic masters, the big capital, that's exactly what they want. And so I'm just going to show you the thread, right? Really quick. I'm not going to go over all of it, but this is a thread. I already read the first post that the violence that took place in Beijing at that time was part of a failed color revolution. That's what I call. Oops, sorry about that. It's a different post. That's what I call Tiananmen Square, and that's what was cited as violence and harassment. That's what I called the event. And then I talked about the funding, $1 million for the fund for reform and opening of China. And key protest leaders were cultivated by this organization. And then after the Tiananmen Square incident, not 2 months afterward, these representatives at this fund were arrested and it was closed down. Why? Well, even though the Chinese government doesn't say this exactly, it's pretty obvious that it was because of the influence that this NGO had in the unrest. And of course, there were other NGOs operating, including the National Endowment for Democracy, which had opened an office there just a year before. So Western media has portrayed the event, Tiananmen Square massacre, Tiananmen Square quote unquote massacre, as a Chinese government massacre. And that journalists on the ground had rejected this, including a Reuters journalist, Graham Earnshaw, who said he saw no violence and that half of the deaths that occurred were Chinese soldiers and police. So it seems pretty strange for a massacre, right? So I'm just citing the quotes that I found, right? So I did. Sorry about that again. This is a clunky desktop Instagram, and then okay. So I went back to the beginning. So then the WikiLeaks cable also right, that said that a Chilean diplomat had corroborated that there was no violence on the square that day. Only Telegraph, the British UK tabloid outlet, reported on it. So no bloodshed there. Then I said that the Tank Man situation, I showed the full video on a prior stream. The Tank Man development that has been so propagandized was not a violent scene. Nothing happened that was violent. The People's Liberation Army didn't kill him, didn't arrest him, didn't maim him, didn't brutalize him. It was just an exchange that was caught on video and was photographed. And it was kind of a weird thing to happen, but ultimately it was very benign and has nothing to do with repression or anything like that. So there's the full video. You can watch it again if you want. I'll keep it on. So there you go. Tank Man. Tank Man has groceries in his hands. He's stopping the tank. Now he's going to talk to the PLA. He's saying, hey, what's going on? I don't know what he's saying exactly, but he gets off of the tank with his groceries. Then he gets right back in front of it, right? And they can't seem to get around him. And he's just standing there. And then a person from the neighborhood says, what the hell's going on? Probably. And then the others whisk him away. And then here you see here you see the United States, the NYPD, what they do in protests, in actual protests, right? How they treat actual protesters in the summer of 2020, the Black Lives Matter uprisings. Look at that. The NYPD is running over people. It's literally running over people. So I think there's a stark contrast there. And that's what got me censored on Twitter. Then I talk about the concealing of the images of soldiers without arms, because that was the vast majority, if not all, before the actual violence that occurred outside of Tiananmen Square happened. There were no weapons or arms being carried by the military. They generally do not carry arms in the country. You rarely see armed anybody, police or otherwise, walking the streets of China. I spent 2 weeks there. I saw more than a few, especially in Urumqi, in Xinjiang. I saw more than a few police officers, more than a few PLA. You could call them national military forces, because that's where the army is mainly directed. It's a sort of a security force for the country. They're usually marching in formation, just marching together in small groups, and they are not armed generally. So that's just the facts of the situation. And then I said, major achievements since Tiananmen Square that China has made are really worth noting, because it contrasts so much with the direction of the United States and the West, which their pursuit of color revolutions, as we talked about, endless war, as we talked about with Camila, is a big reason why there's so much instability in the world. And it's facilitating a whole lot of social change, both good and bad. But nonetheless, we need to talk about that contrast, because it says a lot about the myth of Tiananmen Square. So that's what got me censored, everyone. That's the deal. That thread was on Twitter. It was doing kind of well. I thought it could have been doing better, but it was obvious that I was being mass reported. I kind of thought I was going to be, or at least flagged for some reason, because I saw some of the quote tweets, and it had obviously triggered a lot of these anti-China bots, Ukraine flag bots, all of these forces that are kind of obsessed with following people like us, even though they despise us, right? I get hate mail, I get things like that in my especially Instagram is so toxic. I don't understand. I guess maybe I would get more of it on Twitter. Maybe I have a setting where they can't DM me. I don't know. Twitter, it takes a lot for me to get to know how to use these things. So there are some settings I'm just not even aware of still, and I've been using it for quite some time. But what is important is that I know who obsessively follows me because I talk about China, because I take certain positions on Russia. There is this, dare I say, fascistic ideological development happening in the United States and the West, where anti-Russia, anti-China, xenophobia, Russophobia, it is growing to such a fever pitch that there are forces. I'm not going to call them proletarian. I'm not going to call them working class forces, but they're kind of like a strata of people who see the decline of empire happening. Maybe they were comfortable with empire. Perhaps we could call them petty bourgeois. petite bourgeois, which is the correct way of putting it. There are forces in all sides of the political spectrum like that who are really ready to be foot soldiers in this war. You saw during this special military operation by Russia, you saw people like Malcolm Nance supposedly pick up a gun and go to Ukraine. Really, he's just sitting in a hotel tweeting. But you had people picking up arms going to Ukraine saying, "This is my fight against Russia." Right? A lot of them were former military, but not all of them. And I think that should tell us, right? You had Americans fighting. You had U.S. backed forces fighting in Syria. You have this, I think, section of people, and also a lot of bots, and the ways that, of course, I'm sure there's a government forces backing them, but also just reactionaries doing this, where they're really taking advantage of the political environment that the United States government, that the United States is putting into place as it pursues this deadly, dangerous geopolitical strategy. Because this is all about imperialist dominance, trying to silence voices who do not believe that the United States should be so aggressive toward China and Russia, that China and Russia are not the epitomes of evil, that these countries have a lot to offer the world, that their economic and political systems have been undergoing significant change, different changes, but nonetheless, their alliance has also, I think, been born from what is common between them, and that is the desire, the aim of sovereignty, economic, political, and military sovereignty, as well as the desire to maximize their this sovereignty in the interests not just of themselves, but also their partners. And both of them, at one point or another, consider the United States to be one of those partners. Of course, that has been massively shifted and changed and transformed by the United States' behavior. So, with all of that said, looks like I'm actually on my last legs with battery. Um, so, what I'm going to do is I'm not going to end the stream just yet. I'm going to take a little bit of a break. So please do stick around. Please do continue to like the stream. I don't want this to die on all of you. So stick around. I'll be right back. I'm just going to mute myself. Sorry, I'm going to mute myself, stop my camera, stick around, like the stream, all that good stuff. And I'm going to find my charger. Hold on one second. Okay, I'm back. I am charging now, I believe. Although my computer's all funky lately, so I actually don't know. Let me look. I have to like drag things over. Am I charging? Get out of my way. All right, here we go. I am good to go. I am charging. All right, everyone. Continue to like the stream, hit that notifications bell, share, all that good stuff. Make sure I shouldn't be muted anymore. Am I muted anymore? Oh, okay. Like the stream, hit that notifications bell, share it around. Please do subscribe to my Patreon. Help me achieve the goal. I'm actually thank you so much for all those who have come to my aid and supported my journalism. Do subscribe. That's the best way to sustain. And as I said before, I'm on Telegram now. That's where I'll be publishing my work. Next up for me, though, guys, is I want to definitely announce, I'm going to put the Telegram back in there, but I have an event coming up. I've said it in past streams, but I'm going to pull it up again because I do want you all to come to it. It's next week. I'm going to be writing an article based on the remarks that I'm going to be giving, because that's how I organize my time. It's going to be on. So I'm going to just plug what I'm going to talk about. It's going to be on class war and multipolarity. How the struggle for multipolarity is in fact part of an overall global class war. And here it is, Friends of Socialist China, socialistchina.org. We're holding this event 11 a.m. Eastern this Saturday, June 11th. So I co-edit this platform. You want to definitely be up to speed with it. Definitely make sure you sign up for the newsletter. Make sure that you register for this event on Eventbrite. There it is. And be there 11 a.m. Eastern, 8 a.m. Pacific, 4 p.m. British time, 11 p.m. China time. We're going to be talking about NATO AUKUS, the China-Russia relationship, the Biden's administration undermining the One China principle in Taiwan, Solomon Islands, all of this stuff, NATO's plan for Ukraine, how it impacts China, prospects of sovereign development, all the things that I talk about, but with people who are just as smart, if not smarter than me. So you definitely want to be there. You'll have Ben Norton, Victor Gao, right? This is a great guest list. Li Jingjing, Jenny Clegg. I'll be there to speak. Chris Motauko of the South African Communist Party. You'll have the executive director of Pakistan China Institute, Mustafa Haider Saeed. You'll have a senior fellow at Taihe Institute China, Professor Ding Yifan, who was recommended by the International Department of the Communist Party of China. So that should be a very interesting talk. Joo-hyun Park of Nuduntal, which is a Korean community development organization, very strong anti-imperialist organization. Rob Kajiwara, Peace for Okinawa Coalition, incredible activist. I definitely need him on this stream. Definitely do need that very soon. So every time I look at this, I'm like, oh, that's an idea. Sarah Flounders, a great activist with the United National Anti-War Coalition and the IAC International Action Center. Yuri Tavrovsky, chairman of the Russia-Chinese Committee for Friendship, Peace, and Development. Very interesting fellow and incredibly smart. And you all know Radhika Desai. She's been on the program, convener of the International Manifesto Group. She will be there as well. So definitely register for this. I will put it in the chat again. I will make sure that it is in the description of the video as well, directly after I end this stream. So please do come to that event, register for it, share it around, make sure you tell all your friends, make sure you're sharing it on your social media, make sure you're informing those who also have platforms to be covering this event. So that's all I wanted to say about that. And now let's make this a full 2 hours. I can go 13 more minutes. Thank you all for sticking around with me. Any questions, any concerns, any super chats? I don't see any super chats, so we don't have to do the questions like that. But if you have any, put them at the bottom of this chat, and we can have a a brief discussion. While you're doing that, I also want to plug something else that I do. I will admit that I'm having incredible difficulties tech-wise, and it's a new app, so this is not a slight on the app. This is not a slight on anybody. It's just my experience. I'm having incredible technical difficulties. It's both me, because I have an Android phone that is OnePlus, and OnePluses are just having so many issues with this new app, and I'm sure it's on their end too. But I'm on Callin as a podcaster. So I do a weekly podcast called Cold War Brew. It is now in the description. Please do subscribe to that. So please do just be there. This is a good one. I like this. I like this question. I'm gonna answer in a second. But I just put the link to the Callin app show that I do. Follow it. Subscribe to that. Make sure you're plugging. It's also on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. You can find it afterward, but we can have live discussions. So if you enjoy when I answer your questions, I do that almost primarily. I do like 20 minutes of just my own content, but then the rest of it, 40 minutes or more, is dedicated to just questions, just conversation live with you all, where you can call in and talk directly with me. I really like it. I haven't had anyone disrespectful yet. I haven't had anything like that happen. It's been a great experience, and so you definitely want to follow that. With that said, though, this is a great question. Thanks for the super chat. I'm gonna butcher your name, Lucretia. Yeah, it's. I hope that I'm saying it correctly. But you said, have any tips for dealing with liberal family members? Yes. So, my father was a diehard liberal, New Deal liberal, supportive of Bernie Sanders, but this is a tough month for me because there's an anniversary of his death is coming up this month. I struggled a lot with him, especially as around the 2012, 13, 14 onward until he died in 2017. I struggled a lot with him in conversations, definitely. I I came to this there were so we all go through our kind of political we all have a political evolution. We all approach politics in certain ways with people who disagree with us, especially liberals when we're on the left, especially liberals who are close to us. Sometimes we go scorched earth, right? We're like, fuck it, we don't give a shit about what they think. We're just gonna go hard on our position, and if they don't like it, tough. Or some of us are like, well, I'm not really gonna talk about this stuff because they're not gonna change anyway, and I don't want to get into that kind of conflict with family because it's too stressful. It's not what I need. So many other reasons. I've definitely been on all of and there are many things in between all of that. I've definitely been everywhere with that when it came to my father and, family in general. I don't have a huge family, but um, I would say that for me, I think I always sit in the middle of like, well, I don't need this stress. So if I can't convince them, then I just won't talk about it. Versus when we do talk about politics, I'm just kind of scorched earth and I just go. And I just say what I feel, say what I mean. And sometimes if there's emotion behind it, it can be, it can be a source of conflict. But I think because liberalism is the dominant ideology of capital and capitalism, and it is the most effective ideology of capital and capitalism, I think what's difficult is that we often think that liberals are just going to turn leftists. And while there's some truth to that, because there is, of course, right, a class basis to everything. So people who have certain experiences, people who have certain struggles, people who sit at a certain place in this class order, yeah, they're probably, even if they are liberals, they're probably more likely to be influenced by the situation that they're in, their conditions, and yeah, they might move in the positive direction politically, hopefully toward a socialist direction. But it's not a guarantee, and that's because of the hegemony of liberalism. So I think for us who are already at a place where we believe in class consciousness and working class politics and socialism and Marxism and revolution and anti-imperialism, all of this, we're already there and evolving and joining organizations and participating in media, all of this, we're already there. I think what we can do is just stay true to ourselves, right? Stay true to ourselves. We can't necessarily be our family's organizers, right? We would like that, but I remember something I remember that was so inspirational and influential on my politics, especially because there's not much of this spoken about and written about. But I remember reading A Dying Colonialism by Frantz Fanon. And it's a credible book because it's set during his observations of the anti-colonial movement, the national liberation movement in Algeria. And he talks about a lot of the kind of social and cultural intricacies of what it means to throw off the yoke of colonialism and how it impacts culture, how it impacts society, how it impacts social life. And he did raise this question of families kind of being torn apart at times because disagreements with not just the politics of the revolution, not just the politics of the anti-colonial struggle, but also with the method, right? Even if the family agreed, yeah, we need liberation, yeah, we need to be independent from the French, we need to have sovereignty and independence. Even with that, there was a disagreement on the method. How would this be done? Would it be done in a manner that's peaceful? Would it be done through violence? Would it be done through a combination? Would it be done? How would it be done? And those disagreements also tore apart families. So I think that for us, the best we can do is stay true to ourselves, right? While also understanding that our families are not class monolithic, that politics are complex. If they're liberals, we're going to have disagreements, and uh, the best way we can navigate them is to just ensure, just for our psyches as well, just to ensure that we're being true and that our actions, right, the way we speak, what we do, that tends to be influential. That tends to move people, right? Even my father, before he died, I could tell that he was, even though wasn't like a militant radical, he grew up in the 60s. He hated Richard Nixon. He wrote about Emma Goldman. He had a lot of like contradictory understandings of things. He voted for Bernie Sanders, but all the same, he would, do whatever he could to get Democrats elected, right? It wasn't like he was a revolutionary, but even just being who I was, I could see that he was more engaged in just talking about certain things and, amenable to some of my positions on even race, which was a difficult thing for him because he was white and he grew up in a rural background. His father, German, Irish immigrants. Let's just say that the combination of that and being in the military did not make him the most racially sensitive person all of the time, even if he understood the history and complexities of racism to a degree, maybe more than most white people did. He still would say things that I'm not going to even repeat on here, right? And that taught me a lot about race and racism, the complexities, because you could see that line always straddled, right? He would defend Black people's rights for human rights. Yeah, he would. And then he, at the same time, because he grew up in a military culture, he also grew up in a rural area among immigrants who had their own ethnic and race divides. I mean, he said things that I didn't even know what the hell he was saying for most of my life until I started to really look into this stuff. So I think we can just be true to ourselves and we can stand up for what we think is right. We can talk about it with our families if they're liberals and they are just so insufferable. You'll know. I think you'll know. I think you probably already do know from your own experience. When just it ain't working and it's not gonna work, right? But I think your own actions and what you do speaks for itself. I've seen it especially with friends, right? Both my wife and I have friends that have been moved politically significantly just by them following what we do, talking to us about these issues. They're all liberals, or they all started at some form of liberalism, even if they were to the left of liberal, but most of them were not. And so it makes a big difference. It makes a big difference what we do and what we say. And now we have a lot of friends joining communist parties. I mean, that's just something that I wouldn't have imagined. And I can say that most of these folks I've known within the last 10 years. So what we do really does matter because what we do corresponds, I think, with the material reality of the situation. So we have a certain orientation. We're not we're not just throwing this is not like I mean we're not I'm hoping you're not an anarchist not because it's bad to be an anarchist 100%, but I do think that there's a method to the madness for us, and we have certain goals and aims and we're pursuing them the best we can under very difficult conditions, and that makes a difference. People are influenced by that, and so I think just keep doing whatever you're doing and continue to pursue what you want to pursue in this struggle, and it will pay off, even if it doesn't seem like family is just going to be 100% with you all the time. But anyway, Very good question. That question got me because I love it. Because I love that kind of question because it just speaks to the heart of just our lives. This is the real life. Um, yeah, Lucretia, you said it. We live in communities with each other. Don't we ever? And don't we live in a moment where we are just so much more alienated from each other because of COVID, economic crises, just overwork, the material conditions of the society are very difficult, very challenging. And so uh, it's almost like our social lives are very precious, and they are also kind of the incubators for the direction we want to go in, right? We don't want to be living in communities where it's just like us having politics and the politics mean nothing except just for ourselves, right? We do this in order to bring our communities, our peoples, our class, right? We do it for that. We don't do it just because there's I mean, look, I've been on the left for a long time. I have been part of a lot of different organizations. I have met a lot of various tendencies, people who sit on all the different socialist and Marxist tendencies. I met, I won't say I've met them all, but I have met a lot. And I can say that there are some people who are definitely in this political thing on the left who are really they just care about themselves. And we know, we've seen it, we've met them, we know them, we don't like it. We oftentimes don't like them, but it's a reality. It exists. It's a very American tendency, and it's something that we always have to be combating. But generally, and it seems like where this question came from is we are actually concerned about our politics having influence in bringing our communities, our class to a point of emancipation, liberation, and all that comes with that. So I don't see any other questions. Lucretia had a really good one. I actually post that one. That's a great question. Yeah, I don't see any others. If there's anyone else who wants to drop in a question real quick before I peace out, please do. Um, Thank you, Indigo Kami. Kami, I said Indigo Kami. Thank you, Indigo Carmine. Great discussion, contemporary political diversity, fluidity in different public and private spaces. Yes, indeed. We have to really navigate what that's all about. Family from the 20th century, 60s, 70s, are victims of capitalist education. Oh, aren't they ever? Yeah, no, isn't it true? Especially as we get closer to the 80s. Thank you, Patrick Massey. I wanted you to go on Bad Faith for so long, and that impromptu debate was so great. You came up looking really, really good. Wow. Appreciate that, Patrick. I'd love to be on Bad Faith. Haven't gotten the invitation for that podcast, but I appreciate being on nonetheless, the debrief. Um, so, tips for ignoring lib families: ignore them, fully reject being a family person to become one of the revolution, and we comrades are your family now. I mean, that's definitely a direction. I think that's the direction a lot of us are going to start going in as things intensify too. Um, so, yeah, I don't see any other questions. So it's been a full 2 hours here. The first hour was an incredible conversation with Camila Escalante. I always enjoy having her on because I just feel the solidarity, the anti-imperialism, the socialism, and also just from a perspective that is rooted in the struggle. We have a lot of people talking. We do have a lot of people talking, but not a lot of voices who are doing the walking. And this isn't to be like, oh, well, you're not doing anything if you're doing media. That's not true. I primarily do media now. But I think there's a certain orientation to our politics that we can kind of, at least I can tell, when it's rooted not just in like making the hot take, trying to be right, but also trying to reach people, talk to people, understand who is an antagonist to our politics, who is just contradictory, what are resolvable contradictions between the people and among us. The old Mao reading that you all should read on contradiction, right? It's a great It's a great work. But right, the difference between contradictions among the people versus contradictions between the people versus contradictions and antagonisms with the power elite, the ruling class. Like all of this is very important to understand. And we can tell who, I can tell at least people who are just kind of trying to be right, trying to maybe hit that algorithm versus people who are trying to influence things and or influence the movement, right? Trying to really move people in a positive direction. People who say they're communist and then just kind of do clickbaity stuff versus people who say they're socialist and communist and then actually try to adhere to the principles, the theory, and the work that's involved in that and the responsibilities that we have to people, the responsibilities we have to the movement, the responsibilities that we have to the politics, which are an extension and an expression of the people and of the movement. So, you know, I think whenever Camila's on, I can, I always have that like, like, oh yeah, no, she's definitely she's definitely in this. She's as Big Teal said, is a real one. Thanks for calling me a real one, but she's definitely a real one. Thanks, Lucretia. Thank you to Loa Socialisti for coming back. Appreciate it. Yeah, definitely check her out. So with that said, everyone, Telegram call it. Like how you slipped that in there. I will try to figure that out. I've been figuring things out on Telegram. I will continue to figure that out. Is it the live stream feature? It said live stream. I didn't know what that meant, but I can definitely do that with you all. I would like to get a little bigger first. I have about 565 subscribers. So please do continue to subscribe to that Telegram if you have not yet, because I'd like it to grow. And then, yeah, we can definitely do some. There it is again, the Telegram. You can definitely do some live stuff, some fun stuff, in the interim. But yeah, look out for that event Saturday. Register for it if you have not. I pulled it up on the screen. I'll put it in the description right after I'm done here. Let me not forget that. Actually, let me just put it also in the chat so you will. If you can access links in the chat, I'm always never that sure. So here is the link to that again. Register for that event. I am going to put it in the description of this video too. So check that out. And with that said, everyone, enjoy the rest of your Monday. I gotta get to writing. I hope to be back on at some point in the end of the week, but next couple days, today, tomorrow at least, I need to get to writing. I need to prepare for this event. I need to make sure that I have some analysis that will be helpful. All right. All right. Salute everyone. I'll be back. Thanks for supporting. Of course, like that stream as you're going away. Subscribe to that channel as you're going away. Make sure that you hit that notifications bell as you're subscribing. Make sure that you're, if you can, supporting my work at patreon.com/DannyDhaiphong or Substack or anywhere else that you feel like you're able to support me in. It's all in the description and it's all very much appreciated. Peace out. Bye-bye. Take care.